Let's build an engine. Okay, quick recap. I left off on part one, trying to figure out if I wanted to put a replacement engine in here out of a salvage yard or just rebuild this one. And I came to the conclusion that not only is this less expensive to rebuild, it's going to be like, I think maybe $700-800 total to basically rebuild most of this engine versus spending like $2,000 to $2,500 from a salvage yard. And even if I did that, I would still probably be taking it apart just like I am here, just to check everything. I'm not going to just probably throw in an engine from a salvage yard without, checking out the timing chains, the guides, maybe even inspecting these bearings down here. It just something you'd want to do for a peace of mind. So why not just rebuild what I have? So that's what we're doing. In a recap, the connecting rod bearings, got a couple of them here. This one is actually deformed because I had to peel it off the crankshaft. It's not really focusing very well, but the babbitt pretty much welded itself to the crankshaft. So those are the connecting rod bearings, but I am replacing the main bearings as well. They are in there. They got some assembly lube on them. I have cleaned up the surface where the lower cradle goes. I just use a razor blade to get the bulk of the material off. And then I use some brake clean and 1500 grit sandpaper and clean it up. And then one last brake clean over the surface here and then wipe it with a microfiber towel. Now let's go ahead and set the crankshaft. I'm the type of guy that likes to try to put the thrust washers in first, so they're already in there. You just put a little bit of assembly lube on the back side of them, and they just kind of hydraulically stick themselves to the side there. Let's set the crank in. Okay, there's the crank in there. There's a couple things when you get a new crankshaft. You will have to swap some parts. Timing chain, gears over here, and the tone ring for the crankshaft position sensor. You'll have to swap that as well. Okay, now that that is set in there, let's go ahead and put the new bearings on the caps and set the caps down. Okay, sorry for the background noise. The neighbors cut some tile. Here's the main caps. Now you'll see that they have an arrow kind of sort of in the center that points towards the front of the engine, and inside that arrow is going to be a number. That's number 1, that's number 2. Right here in my hand I'm holding number 3. See if I can get it to focus. See that number 3 right there with the arrow pointing towards the front of the engine. This is number 4, arrow pointing towards the engine, and 5, arrow pointing towards the front of the engine. Now this goes without saying, it should be obvious, but the crank bearings you put on the bottom have two basically slots to them with holes drilled in the center, which you probably just saw in the video. The top portion is completely flat. Okay, so make sure you get that right and don't put the flat ones on the bottom. Okay, let's set this last one on here like so. I'm just going to thread it just a couple threads. And then I'm going to take a hammer and knock all these down flush. Okay, all the caps are seated down. These bolts have been run down. 14 millimeter, 12 point. The torque specs on this, it's a little conflicting data that's out there. All data says one thing, OEM manual says a different. I'm going to go with 23 foot-pounds on the first pass and then plus 120 degrees. As long as these bolts end up somewhere between 60 and 80 foot-pounds, I'll be totally happy. So I'm going to do this in a crisscross pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to get all that done. I'll get back with you. Okay, those are all torqued down. Make sure that you put a wrench on this thing and make sure it spins freely. It does. So we are going to put the pistons in now. So I'm going to set this up to get the pistons in. I think I'll do number 1, then number 4, and then I'll turn this crankshaft so cylinder 2 and 3's journals are at the bottom, and then put those in. Let's flip this engine right side up. Okay, we got the engine right side up. I've done a preliminary cleaning here on the head sealing surface. We'll clean it up a little bit more later, but for now, let's get these pistons in. You'll remember that I put a number 1 with an arrow aiming towards the front of the engine there. The ring compressor is on. You just kind of take your hammer and lightly make sure that this thing is totally flush down there. Okay. Then, oh, by the way, make sure you oil up these cylinders. Get some assembly lube in there or some engine oil, whatever you want to use. And compress the rings on the piston. Then you take your butt into the hammer. And we tap this in here. And also, one final thing, I did put the new bearing on the actual connecting rod. Here it is on the cap. The new bearing is on here with some assembly lube on it. But I did the same thing on this piston with the connecting rod. It's already got its bearing on there. So let's tap this thing in there and see how this goes. Boom. Easy peasy. All right, now we'll push it down and onto the journal, and I'll show you a shot up from the bottom. Okay, just a quick timeout before I show you the shot on the bottom here. I ended up going back and reusing the old crank. The new crank, once I got these cinched down, the tolerance was just not right. It was just a little bit too tight for my feel. You know, I did buy it from China. Sometimes things are good from China, sometimes they aren't, and I lucked out. Or didn't luck out on this one. Anyway, I also got a new connecting rod. You can see here that the connecting rod here has been damaged from one of the bearings that spun. So basically you just take the circlip out of the side and then knock the wrist pin out and then put the new connecting rod in. You'll notice that I put some marks here. You want to put it in exactly how it came out. Okay, so everything you're going to see from here on out is the old crankshaft. Basically what I did is just got the babbitt off of the journals. The babbitt is much softer. It's like got some copper or something in it, and it's a much softer metal than the journal, so you can use some sandpaper or whatnot and just get that softer metal off the harder metal. All right, let's continue on. Okay, and then there is the cap on underneath here, cylinder number 1. Again, I mark these things, put dots on them. You can't really mess this up because these are cracked rods. You can't even see it, but there's like a hairline crack in here on how these rods, basically, these caps like separate from here. You'll see it's very like coarse metal underneath here, where they literally just in the manufacturing process just snap it. Okay, and while the crankshaft has number 1 cylinder at bottom dead center, I also went ahead and put in the number 4. Okay, then I just rotated the engine and put in 2 and 3. Okay, looking up top here, cylinder number 1, 2 is in there, 3 is in there, and 4 is in there. They all go in just like I showed you the ring compressor on cylinder 1. All right, now let's flip this thing upside down and torque these connecting rod bolts. Okay, torque spec on these connecting rod caps here is 50 to 53 Newton meters. That's like 36 to 39 foot-pounds, going right in the middle of that range here. I've already done these 2 bolts. I'm just showing you one. Got this thing set to like 37 foot-pounds. Click. Done. I'm going to rotate the engine and do the last 2 and get back with you. Now that all that is done, it's time to get this lower cradle on. Razor blade, clean this up. Brake cleaner with 2000 sand grit paper, sandpaper or so, and clean this up. Then brake clean again and then clean it with a cloth. Same thing up here on the bottom of the block. This is all nice and clean. It's dry. It's ready to get the sealant on here. I'm going to put some Permatex Ultra Gray on this thing here. Let it sit for a few minutes and then flip it upside down and set it on top of the engine here. Okay, there we are. The sealant is on there. Let it sit up for like, 5-10 minutes or so. Get just a little bit tacky on there. Then right on the other side here, I have the oil pump and all the bolts for the oil pump right here and the lower cradle right there. Okay, this has been sitting here for almost 10 minutes now. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it up and set it on top. Okay, the lower cradle and oil pump are on. Let me explain the bolts to you here. The longer bolts go here, 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 and here. Those are the 4 long ones. The 2 shorter ones for the oil pump are this one here and this one here. It's pretty obvious when you go to set bolts in where they go. Now going around here, you got one down here, one down here. Those are the shorter black bolts. Then these start the longer ones here, 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 there, and there. Go back to the shorter ones, black ones. You got one there, you got one there. And then, remember on this side, that there's a bracket that goes around the oil pan here. There's going to be a bolt for here and a bolt for here that goes through the oil pan and then to the cradle down here. I'm not going to put those in for a while. This is on tight enough. Now you can see that we've got some of the Permatex Ultra Gray sticking out here, going around the side. To me, this is about the perfect amount you want squeezing out. There's always the saying that if you see it on the outside, you see it on the inside. Yeah, that's true, but you know, whatever. This is a good amount right here sticking out. Okay, let's clean up this oil pan surface, and also we'll start timing this engine up a little bit. Remember, this has got some balance shafts in here, so there's some timing marks on this guy. You can see a dot right here. There'll be a dot way to time this up on the crankshaft down there, so we'll get to that here next. Okay, let's talk about timing. The first thing you got to do for timing, because of the balance shafts that are on the oil pump housing there, is get this chain on in the right time. So let me bring you in closer here and show you a couple things. First thing to do is get your crankshaft where the key here is basically at the 9 o'clock position, pointing at in between this main cap and the block here, okay? That key facing there. And then you will see a dot. It's right on the other side of this orange link right here. It's difficult to see. You know what, actually the orange link might be covering up the dot. We got a little mark on here. That is step 1. And then down here on the yellow link, you are going to see another dot. I need to clean this up a little bit here. You see another yellow link and a dot there. And not only do you need to line up that link and that link down here, this orange link with the marks, there is also a circle here, and you'll see a little indent right here. Let me zoom in on this. This mark right here needs to line up with this indentation right here. So I'm going to lean this oil pump forward and rotate this sprocket several times until that indentation lines up with here and this dot is back with the link. Okay, there we go. Now you can see that this little line is lined up with this line here. We got the yellow link on here. And then down below, that orange link is on the dot of this crankshaft with the key facing at the, well, it's the 3 o'clock position with the engine upside down. It would be the 9 o'clock position with the engine right side up. Once you get that lined up, easy peasy. You just put on the static guide over here on this side, the tensioner arm, then the actual tensioner. This is a spring-loaded tensioner. It's got a little hole here. Once you push it in, you see this slot right here. If you push this in all the way, you can put a pin in here and it'll hold it for you. Alright, I've zoomed way in on the crankshaft gear here. This is that orange link I was pointing at. You can see that dot right behind there. That link just spreads right over that dot. Now, in order to actually get this chain on, even without any guides, either the tensioner arm or the static guide, you either have to take this sprocket here off, or easier is just to, before you get the oil pump bolted down, have it kind of at an angle underneath here, bring it up into the chain, and then up into the bottom of the engine. So obviously there's a few things you should do to prepare before putting on a cylinder head. This particular one, you know, like any of them, are dirty on the bottom. So razor blade, coarse clean this thing, brake clean, a little bit of 2000 sand grit paper, more brake clean, wipe it off. Then I took some compressed air and just cleaned out all these ports and stuff while it was down here. If you go to flip this head over, make sure that you take the cam followers out first and line them up. These are solid buckets, so you want to put them back exactly where they went in the cylinder head. As you see, I got them just lined up back there. So when I flip the cylinder head back over, I'll just put the buckets back in as they go. Now let's look at the block. All right, block is all nice and clean. Each cylinder head bolt hole, take some compressed air, blow it out, make sure there's no gunk or fluid or anything down in there that the bolt might get hung up or bottom out on, give you a false torque or something of that nature. All right, this is all nice and clean. Let's set the cylinder head gasket. Okay, the cylinder head gasket is set. I'm going to flip the head right side up, put the buckets back in, and then set the cylinder head. Okay, got the cylinder head set back on the engine, and I've put in almost all the bolts. You can see them here. You see one sticking up here. Basically, use some new bolts. I got some Felpro brand. Put some little bit of oil on the threads on the end here, and then just drop them all in. This is the last one to go, and then they are all in. These two on the end, remember, have washers independent because it's such a tight clearance inside here. It comes with washers that don't stay on the bolts. Those two go up here. All right, now I'm going to run all these down basically hand tight, and then we'll get into torquing. Okay, cylinder head bolt torque, 25 foot-pounds is the first pass. Somewhere-ish, there's a range, but 25 is like basically right in the middle of it. So start in the middle, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Just keep going in a crisscross pattern until you're all the way to the outside. From the inside, and then work your way out. After 25 pounds, you do the same pattern on a plus 90 degrees, and then the same pattern one last time plus 90 degrees. So 3 stages, 25 foot-pounds, crisscross pattern, middle working out, plus 90 degrees, middle working out, and then plus 90 degrees, middle working out. I'm going to do that and I'll get back with you. Okay, all the cylinder head bolts are torqued down. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the surface of this where the valve cover is going to go. Again, it's just really taking a razor blade, you know, and doing a coarse cleaning here. It's like you were to shave, right? You just put the blade down here, kind of put it more like upright at a 90-degree angle. It's kind of hard to show here with my arm in the way. Just kind of like pull along here, clean the surface off. If you get to some rough stuff, you can kind of turn the blade like you were to get a sticker off of like a windshield or something like that. And anyway, I'm going to clean all that up with the razor blade. Then after that, it's going to get brake clean, a little bit of sandpaper, like 2000 grit, and then one final brake clean. We'll get this all cleaned up. Okay, that is all nice and cleaned up for now. Let's put the camshafts back in here. All right, I've got the intake cam just lightly set in here. Don't forget, on the exhaust camshaft, you got a little bearing shell here that goes in here. So seat that down in there. Make sure it was clean before putting it down, and then grab your exhaust camshaft, and we'll set this in here. You're going to see a few markings on these. You see this dot up here? I want to set these in here a certain way to get them close to where it's going to be timed up. Got one dot over here for the intake and this dot over here for the exhaust. This line is close here, and so is this line. I'll get into more detail on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and get the caps back on. Put the caps on in the order you took them off. Okay, all the bearing caps are back on and torqued down. And don't forget this front cap here. It's got a bearing shell underneath it. Put a little bit of oil underneath these caps as you set them on. Kind of give it like some assembly lube going on there. Okay, now this is an incredibly easy engine to time, and I will show you how it goes. All right, the chain is on and the guide's on. I'm going to take you off the stand and show you how easy this is. All right, let's start up top here. On the exhaust side, you're going to see a circle right here on the sprocket. Colored link goes right over that circle. Going over here to the intake cam, there is a circle and there's a colored link there. You're going to see that these lines right here pretty much point at each other. So that's where you want that. And then as you move down here, you're going to see a dot on the bottom crankshaft sprocket. It's tough to see with it actually on, and there's some oil on it right there. But it's right there at the 6 o'clock position, and then the orange link goes on there. All right, then after you get that on, it's basically just put the static guide back in over here, the 10 millimeter bolts, and then the tensioner arm over here. All right, and then we'll get the tensioner on. Let me show you, there's a little bit of a trick to getting this back on, compressed and back on. Okay, here it is. Now, the way that these things work is they ratchet out over time. They work on hydraulic pressure. You get hydraulic, you got the oil pressure going in here and pushing it out. But also, so when you don't have oil pressure, it'll ratchet out and keep the chain tight for like cold starts and whatnot. So in order to get this reset, you got to push this lever on this side over here down and then push this back in. And it's not going to line up yet, but if you let this come out just a couple clicks until this arm is now lined up with the hole. I'm just going to take a pin here and stick this in here and pin it. Alright, then I'm going to set it in here, bolt it down, and pull the pin. Okay, I got it bolted in there, and I just let it out a few clicks, and you can see that there's still some slack right there, right? So then we will just pull this pin, and then it ratchets out, and it will keep itself out here as it needs to. As it'll go one more click here. There we go. I'm going to try to pull on these. Just give it as much tension as possible so it's ratcheted out as far as it'll go. And as the chain stretches over the life, this thing will continue to ratchet out and keep the tension up. So, just to review, orange link, put your crank at the 9 o'clock position here. You'll see the keys here. There'll be a dot on the sprocket back here for this oil pump chain. Make sure that this line is lined up to that line. Put the colored link over the dot of the oil pump chain there, and put your static guide and your tensioner back in over here. And then this chain, with the Woodruff keys here at the 9 o'clock position, there'll be a dot underneath here. You put the colored link there, 6 o'clock position. Work your way up. There's a dot right there. Put the colored link over it. Exhaust cam, colored link, dot there. Tensioner arm, tensioner. That's literally it. There is there's a spot on this camshaft here where you can put a wrench. Helps you turn it as needed if you'll need to. You probably will need to turn it just a little bit. I had to, because these lobes start pushing down some of the valves for the pistons that are down inside there. Pistons 2 and 3 are going to be a little bit more down. Of course, piston 1 is basically top dead center. And you're going to see these lobes facing just about this angle here. All right, that is the timing. I'm going to clean up the rest of this surface here, and we're going to get this timing cover on. Okay, here's our timing cover. I have cleaned it up. Usual stuff. You're going to see a common theme as we do this, right? Razor blade, then some brake clean, some 2000 grit sandpaper, another bit of brake clean, and then wipe it clean so it's a nice clean surface. And then I've put the bead of sealant on here. I did the same thing on the surface where this goes. Razor blade, brake clean that surface up, make it nice and clean. I'm going to put a new seal in this timing cover. Here it is. I will link this one, the one that I use, in the condition description below. It's easiest to get the old seal out now, so it's a little bit of a punch here. Just give it a couple taps with a hammer, and out it goes. We will put the new seal in once we get the timing cover actually on. Also, don't forget to put the RTV on these circles here. It's where it meets the block right there, and up on the cylinder head there. All right, let's put this timing cover in place. Okay, just before setting the timing cover, it's always a good practice. You will want to put a dab of sealant. Even though we got it all the way around on the timing cover, put in a dab of sealant where the cylinder head meets the block, right there, where the lower cradle meets the block, so right there and right here. All right, let's get the timing cover and put it in place. All right, now I'll get all the bolts in and cinch them down. All right, the timing cover is on and all the bolts are torqued down. Got a 12mm bolt here, here, and here. Follow down here, over here, here, and here. Then you got a bunch of 10mm bolts here, 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 and right here in the center. There'll be some more that go on the bottom for the oil pan, but we'll get to those later. Now let's work on cleaning up the surface up top here and getting the valve cover on. Oh, also I put the new seal in here. You'll need like I think it was like a 38mm socket, fit right around this, and just tap that in. All right, valve cover. All right, just before putting the valve cover on, make sure you put the housing for the fuel pump back onto the exhaust camshaft back here. Clean that up. And I've put a dab of RTV here where the timing cover meets the cylinder head, and also on the other side, of course. And here is the valve cover with the new gasket on it. Don't forget to replace the gasket inside here for your fuel pump housing. I will link the exact Felpro gasket I used for this in the condition description below. All right, let's set this valve cover. All right, let's set the bolts and bolt her down. Okay, valve cover is on and all tightened down. Lots of bolts. Do these bolts, thread each one, a few threads all the way around before you start tightening any of those. Do yourself a favor, it'll save some headache. That way the valve cover kind of aligns where it needs to sit, and you won't have problems getting other bolts in. Start them all a few threads before going down. When you tighten it down, start in the middle here and then work your way out, just like you did with the cylinder head bolts. All right, over here on this side, I'm going to put in the water pipe and the thermostat housing, water outlet housing over here. Get that in. I've cleaned this out. I use like a, here, let me show you. I use a buffing pad on a Dremel. It's just a real light buffing pad. I don't know what else to call it. Anyway, I just use this, go in and out of here, clean this out. It's nice and smooth metal in there now. All right, let's get this pipe and this housing on. I've also got to clean up this side of the cylinder head. I want to make sure that surface is nice and clean as well. The water pipe and the water outlet manifold are on. Just put a little bit of Vaseline on the, or a little bit of lubrication on the O-ring to help it in there and seat nice and well. And then on the back side here, it's just 3 bolts. It's this nut right here, this bolt right here, and this bolt right here, and then that thing is up against the cylinder head. I apologize if I'm going a little bit too fast for you. The assembly is basically the reverse of removal. Hopefully you watched part 1 and saw how all this stuff comes off, and this is just kind of how I'm putting it back on. Next thing I'm going to do is the exhaust manifold while I'm on this side. I got the gasket on there. I'm going to set the manifold and tighten it down. Poof! Exhaust manifold is on. You have 14mm nuts. Start in the center, work your way out. There's probably a torque spec on this, but just nice and tight from the center, working your way out. There is 1 bolt underneath here. Don't forget that. That goes onto the support bracket for the engine. Now let's work on the injectors, fuel injectors. All right, I've cleaned these up. I've already put one in the rail. I just basically take some brake clean on a cloth and clean all the carbon off this. You're probably technically supposed to replace this Teflon here. This is difficult. There's a special tool to recompress this on here. I find that if I just clean the carbon off here, put a little bit of, basically Vaseline or a little bit of oil on here, you're good to go. Same thing with the O-rings up here. Just inspect those, make sure that there's no rips or tears in them. And I just put a light coat of lubricant on there just to make this easier. Then you grab the fuel rail. All right, here's the fuel rail. Already have one in here. You'll notice that there's kind of a clip here that centers it on this little boss here. There's that clip right here. So basically, with this O-ring nice and lubed up, just stick it in there. Keep working it back and forth till it's seated down. You'll see it right up against the spring there. Okay, I'm going to do that on the other two and set the fuel rail in. There's the fuel rail in. Push it in by hand. Make sure they're all going in without any force. And push it in as much as you can by hand and start the 3 bolts. They're 12 millimeter. And then walk it in with these bolts. A few turns here, a few turns here, a few turns there. Just keep going back and forth between these 3 bolts so it goes in evenly. And then tighten her down. Anything else from here on out is pretty much dealer's choice. I think the next thing I'm going to do is put the alternator on down here. We'll get that alternator on and then maybe the intake. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, there's the alternator back on. First off, you got to put the bracket on. It's like 5 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's hard to see, but right there, that's 5. Get the bracket on and put the alternator on. Put a new idler pulley on here. Probably should have done this one and this one. This has got a lot of surface rust on it. But this one, the actual bearing was bad. This one, the bearing's good in. So, the belt will clean it up. All right, the intake, that's kind of a joke. I think now I'm going to go up top here. I'm going to go ahead and put the spark plugs in. Put the fuel pump back on. And maybe get the wiring harness out and start wiring some things up. Then after that, I'm going to flip this upside down and get the oil pan. Now that the timing cover is on, all the surface for the oil pan mating is ready to go, and we'll do that. So let's get some stuff on up top here. I got new spark plugs. I will link the spark plugs I'm using in the condition description below. Put the coil packs on and then start wiring it up. Okay, new spark plugs are in. New coil packs are on. These are the spark plugs I use. They're Champion. These are OEM. Well, this is what they put in from the factory. 9047. There's also longer part number here. RER 12 WMP Bravo 4. Anyway, I'll link these down in the condition description below, as well as the coil packs. I'll let you know which ones I used. And then let's do the fuel pump now. Right here, we're going to put this fuel pump in, and then we'll turn the engine up and do the oil pan. All right, first thing with a high pressure fuel pump is the cam follower. You'll see a little notch in it right here. There is a notch inside of here that you can't really see, but get this follower in here like so. That is in. Now we will do the actual fuel pump. Okay, here's the fuel pump set in there. Now this is important. What you want to do is this thing's got a seal underneath it. Okay, don't go crazy on one bolt and then do the other. Walk this back and forth. A couple turns on this one. A couple turns on this one. Back and forth till it's all the way down. There we go. All right, now let's get the actual fuel hardline here down to the fuel rail. That is on. This is 19 millimeter and 19 millimeter cinched down. Okay, oil pan. I have cleaned up the surface as much as it's going to get cleaned up here on the engine. Where the timing cover meets the block, there's a dab of Permatex Ultra Black RTV. Any surface that's metal, that's mating to another one, it's always good. It's a good practice to do. Oil pan, it's been cleaned up. I've got the Permatex Ultra Black on there. It's getting tacky. It is time to flip that oil pan over and set it on here. Okay, there's the oil pan on. You got several 10 millimeter bolts going around here. That's the main number of bolts going around, but there's also a couple 12 millimeter bolts. Don't forget those. That go right there, and you still see some bolt holes right there, so we're not done. Remember, there is a bracket I believe it's what the AC compressor attaches to. That's going to go right here, and it's got its own bolts. I'm going to bolt that down. Okay, that bracket is back on. 12mm bolts. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Okay, I'm going to turn this engine back right side up, cylinder head side up. Alright, at this point, I want to go ahead and take this engine off the stand. I was trying to do as much as I possibly could while it was in the stand. But it's to the point now where I want to get this out on the ground and mate the transmission back to it so I can get the starter in, intake, and the wiring and all that other stuff. So let's get it on the ground and put the get the transmission back on it. Before we do that, of course, we're going to put a new rear main seal and put the ring gear flex plate back on. Okay, engine is on the ground, off the stand. New rear main seal is in. I will link the new Timken seal that I used in the condition description below. Okay, let's get the flex plate on. Okay, here's the flex plate going on. It's always good to put in these situations a little bit of Loctite on these bolts. And these are 17mm, 12 point. I'm gonna zip all these down. All right, those are all zipped down. I'm gonna get the transmission slided in here and get it mated up on here. Okay, the transmission is mated back in. I've done quite a few things here. Sometimes I have this problem where I just get moving and I forget to stop and film. But luckily you have part 1, which shows me taking all this stuff off much slower than what you're seeing here. And you can reference that. If you took it off, just put it back on in the reverse order. But I'll explain some things here. I got the transmission on and most of the bolts in. I still have like a few bolts left over. I'm going to wait until this is in the car to finish that, just because they're kind of down at the bottom and hard to get to. And the starter went in, 14mm bolts. And this car has 2 wiring harnesses. Basically one of them with all like the smaller wires and ignition stuff, and then like a main power wire harness. So that was bolted to the alternator here, then to the starter and clipped in for the starter solenoid. And there's a place it clips in here on the coolant lines, and then a place right here on the transmission where it bolts in over there. That's the main power wiring harness. Then I put in the coolant lines. You see these coolant lines here that go up to the thermostat, and put the clamps back on there. And don't forget there's a knock sensor back here that I bolted on that snakes through here. Since I'm holding this camera in a tripod here, it's easy for you to just take a quick picture of this and see what it looks like. Then up top here, I went ahead and plugged in the coil packs, as well as on the side here there's a bunch of wires for various different things. Coolant temperature sensor, it's laying right here ready for the oxygen sensor that's still in the car. Here's the cam sensor wires, cam position sensor wires here. I've basically got this all ready to go to get the intake back on. So that's going to be next. I'm going to set this intake on here and then put this wiring harness back on and finish off this side of the wiring harness. Okay, the intake is on. I'm to the point now where I'm pretty much ready to put this thing back in the car. Again, follow the wiring harness around. It kind of will lay back where it needs to go. This is all connected up. This last connection here is for the AC compressor down here. Just taking a look, make sure you get everything. Over here on the coolant lines, you got a coolant line going from the throttle body up to the water outlet. Another line, small line right here that you need to connect up. I even put the the purge valve back in. It needed a new hose. It was cracked a little bit. That would have caused a check engine light. Yeah, it pretty much just lays back as it needs to go. You'll figure it out, especially if you watch part 1. So I'm going to take it apart. You know how it goes back together. The back side here, I did go ahead and put this metal plate back on. I'm touching it right here. It's kind of like a guard right by the CV joint where that goes into the transmission. It just bolts in underneath here. Yeah, we're ready to go. I'm going to lift this thing up and set it into the car. Alright, the engine is obviously set back in the car here. The way to get this in is a kind of a couple step process. I put it in just a little bit of an angle as it was going in, transmission down just a little bit. That's because once you get it down so far, you're going to want to put in this portion of the mount here. Yeah, get this mount on, because there's some bolts down here that are difficult to get to. or a 14 millimeter, one down here I'm touching, one there, and then this nut here. You got 17 millimeter bolts that bolt back to the transmission here. And then on this other side, remember you got that 17 millimeter nut here. Okay, I'm going to end up going pretty fast putting this thing together. If you saw part one, you saw me nice and slowly, methodically going through how to take everything off. Putting it back on is really the reverse of removal. So this is going to be kind of snappy here. I had 4 transmission bolts left to put in that were on the bottom. One here, one here, one right here, and there's another one. Flip you around right up here. Put it on the exhaust. You got 2 19 millimeter nuts you put back on there. Make sure that the exhaust hanger is back on its mount. We have the bottom torsion mount, bottom engine to, subframe to transmission mount goes here. We're going to put a bracket here. We're going to put the mount back on here. Okay, there we are. Get this bracket on the black one here onto the transmission first with 3 14 millimeter bolts. Then you can put this dog bone in, 14 millimeter on this side and 14 millimeter on this side. Work it up in here, and then get your 17 millimeter long bolt going through here. And now we're going to install the flywheel or ring gear to torque converter bolts. You can move the ring gear, which is part of the torque converter in this car. We're going to line up this first one, put the bolt in, almost all the way tight, just maybe a tad bit more than hand tight. And then we're going to turn the engine over by hand, 22 millimeter. I'll get back with you on that. And so we can get to each bolt. So this is what I mean by just finger tight. Not even, I guess, barely finger tight. You want to be able to move this around a little bit as we crank the engine by hand. Just in case they don't line up perfectly, you can continue to move this around until they're all 4 in. And then you can lock them down. Alright, and after you get all those torque converter bolts on, tighten down, don't forget to put your cover back on. Back up top here, we got the shift linkage right here. I'm going to finagle this underneath everything and bolt it back down and connect it back up. Okay, the shift linkage is back on. 12 millimeter bolts here, 12 millimeter nut to lock it into place here. Make sure you go underneath this wiring harness. There's a 12 millimeter bolt back here for the bracket that holds this wiring harness, and then there is a ground strap that goes to the transmission right here, also 12 millimeter. Next, I'm going to put on, there's a bracket that goes here that not only holds this wiring harness here, the main power wiring harness, but it also supports the battery tray once we get that in. So I'm going to put that bracket in next. Okay, that bracket is on. It is right here. There are 3 12 millimeter bolts underneath it. I went ahead and laid the main power harness across here, 2 10 millimeter bolts in here. This will go on to the positive battery terminal once we get it in. This positive cable here up to the fuse box, that's a 10 millimeter bolt. I went ahead and routed the main engine harness here. 10 millimeter bolt holds it back here. There's a ground cluster right here, 10 millimeter bolt. I plugged it back into the fuse box, the engine fuse box here. I'm going to put the ECM, the computer, back in here. But the ECM is back in. Word to the wise, put the ECM first, then put in this harness. I had to take a few things off this harness to get the ECM in. But it's in. 10 millimeter bolt down here, 10 millimeter bolt right down here, and then there's another bolt here on this this back side. This is why the harness had to come off to get to that bolt back here. Okay, I'm going to move underneath the car now and put the AC compressor back on and put the belt on. Okay, here's the AC compressor back in. You got 4 12 millimeter bolts. Touching another one right here, and hard to see, but on the up here. There you go. And the belt is on, as you can see. Let me flip it around here. Not gonna lie to you, this is kind of a pain in the butt belt to get on. Really hard to show you how it's done. Here is the belt routing, however, if you want to take a look at it. One last thing, don't forget to plug in your AC compressor, otherwise it ain't gonna work. Alright, I'm gonna move on to getting the axles back in. Okay, the axles are in both sides. Here's the passenger side. Make sure that when you push this in, you get the C-clip to seat, and this won't pull back off of itself. And then, you got to get it in the hub over here. And same thing here on the driver's side. Axle's back in. And once you get the axle in through the hub, put the washer on, 1 1/4 nut, zip that down till it's nice and tight, and then find a hole and put the cotter pin back through. All right, working back up top here, there is the oxygen sensor that you need to plug back in. You can see the oxygen sensor right there. Route its wire up in the holders, and then up here and clip it in. I have put the coolant lines for the heater core back on, and I have plugged in the evap line from the gas tank as well as the fuel line back into the fuel pump. And then on this side of the engine, while I was at it, I put the ground strap back onto the cylinder head, 10mm bolt there. We're almost there now, folks. I got the fan shroud back in. That was next. Plugged it in. Remember that it's got 2 tabs in the bottom, and you got 2 10mm bolts, one here. Other side right here. There's a tab down there at the bottom it fits in. It's kind of a tight fit. Then the lower radiator hose connected, upper radiator hose connected and bolted back down. And the transmission cooler lines right here. Put those back on, clamp them back down. Alright, next I'm going to put in the battery box. I might have just called it a battery box. It's battery tray. You got the 4 12mm bolts and boom, it's down. Next I'm going to put the air filter box in. There's a grommet that goes in back here, and then it bolts here and bolts here. Okay, the air filter box is in. You've got that hose clamp down here, 10mm or Phillips. Recommend 10mm down there. And then it's bolted in here in the bottom. I had seated it back in the rubber grommet behind there. You got some vacuum hoses. You got your brake booster hose here. Put that on, reclamp it. And then right here, this feed, put it on, reclamp it. And then this vent hose right here, put that on and put your clamp back on. All right, let's put the battery in. All right, battery is in, connected. It's the fluid fill time. The oil, 5 quarts, 5W20. I am changing the transmission fluid, so it's been drained and filled up. Once I start the car, I'll add some more transmission fluid till it comes out of the plug. I'm not going to explain that. There's plenty of videos on YouTube on how to change the transmission fluid in these vehicles. Coolant, filled up the coolant about like 1.5 gallons, I think. Got that in there. So now's the time. We're going to start this thing. I'm going to crank. It might crank a little while as it builds fuel pressure. Let's see how it does. Not bad. A little bit of misfire off the start there, but I think it's running smooth now. Alright, I'm going to top off this transmission fluid before it gets too hot in the transmission. Alright, there's quite a few videos out there on how to drain and refill this transmission, so I'm not going to get into the details. Let's give you the overview. On the bottom, with the engine off, there's a 24mm drain plug. Once you've drained all the fluid out, put the plug back in. And then I chose to use this fill plug up here. The little plug, you just keep this air duct off. That air duct goes right here, keep that off. And then I just fill through this hole right here. And then right there, I'm shining the light on it. Let me circle it for you. That plug is the check fill plug. So there is a 3/8 drive square on there. You just turn it like 90 degrees and it comes out. So when you do the fresh fill, just fill this until it starts coming out of that hole right down there. And then start your car with that plug out. Run it through the gears, reverse to drive, over and over and over again. And then put it in park and come back out here and start filling again until it comes out of there. Then you're full, put that plug back in. Okay, I back the car out onto my driveway and I clean the engine up. One of these days I'm going to do a video on how to clean your engine, at least the way that I clean these engines, which I think is really cheap and super duper easy. But anyway, it's all nice and clean out here. It's running. I think this is a good time to end the video. There's really nothing left to be said. This thing's going to go into service as my daily driver for a little while before it gets shipped off to its new owner. Thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe. Catch you next time.